This segment is brought to you by Fox River Periodontics, Chicagoland's specialist with dental implants. To get your smile back, visit implantsforme.com.
The hypocrites scatter when I shine the bright light of reason. I'm Larry Elder. Join me tonight at 7 right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Kristen McQuarrie. She, a Chicago Tribune boardist. In for
broad.
Amy this morning.
Board broad.
Board broad?
I'm a board broad.
Hey.
Hey. Yay.
As a feminist, I find that offensive.
Okay.
So the Steve Bannon interview, Charlie Rose spent 45 minutes, 15 minutes interviewing himself, and then 30 minutes interviewing Steve Bannon. Let's focus on the 30 minutes of including Steve Bannon, since he was the subject of the interview, ostensibly. And we've already covered a portion of this, Steve Bannon, on national security policy. So if you didn't hear it, if you weren't up early enough, then go back and listen to the podcast. We got too much to cover. I can't go back.
I know.
I'm sorry.
I know. We'll move on to the. I want to talk about his mainstream media tirade. I thought that was really great. Did you pull that?
I did. Steve Bannon talking about his media image, how much he cares about it.
I don't need affirmation of the mainstream media. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they say. They can call me an anti-Semite. They can call me racist. They can call me native. They can call me anything you want. Okay? As long as we're driving this agenda for the working men and women in this country, I'm happy.
I like that. You got to have armadillo skin to be in this racket. He does. A lot of people say they don't care how the media treats him. They don't care what other people think. Most people are lying to themselves. They do, and they're hurt when a crossword is said about them. I find Steve Bannon to authentically not care.
I think he came very close to saying, I don't give a,
yes,
you know what.
I think, yes. So if we're not 60 Minutes, so we're over a beer, he probably would have said that. But to the point, as long as our agenda is being advanced. So what's that agenda, you ask? Good question. I'm glad you asked it, because Charlie Rose didn't. But Steve Bannon gave him the answer anyway. His vision for economic nationalism, and I would say, in part, this is Trump's vision as well. I'd probably say mostly this is Trump's vision. I think it's better articulated by Bannon. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, here it is.
Don't give me, this is the thing of the left that says, right. Charlie, that's beneath you. Right. America's built on our citizens. Look at the 19th century. What built America is called the American system. From Hamilton to Polk to Henry Clay to Lincoln to the Roosevelts. A system of protection of our manufacturing, financial system that lends to manufacturers, okay, and a control of our borders. Economic nationalism is what this country was built on, the American system, right? We go back to that. We look after our own. We look after our citizens. We look after our manufacturing base, and guess what? This country is going to be greater, more united, more powerful than it's ever been. And it's not. This is not astrophysics. Okay, and by the way, that's every nationality, every race, every religion, every sexual preference. As long as you're a citizen of our country, as long as you're an American citizen, you're part of this populist economic nationalist movement.
Do you agree with that populist economic nationalist movement as described by Bannon, the direction, the policy direction he is detailing? 312-642-5600, turnkey.pro answer line. 64636DA, turnkey.pro text line. And Bannon went from there, and there was a little discussion of Charlottesville, Kristen, as you know. Mm-hmm. And, he's not having it with this effort to mau people like him with threats of calling you a racist, or actually calling you a racist. You heard him say he doesn't care what you call him as long as we're moving his policy agenda. Here's him not putting anything too fine a point on it.
Everybody listening to you who talks about one of the great issues in American life today, which is the plight of the middle class. But they also believe that there is, on your part and the president's part, not enough appreciation for some of the values also that made America great. And you don't appreciate that. And you don't appreciate the diversity. You don't appreciate the respect for civil rights.
I was raised in a desegregated neighborhood. North side of Richmond is predominantly black. Okay, I went to an integrated school, a Catholic school. I served in the military. I don't need to be lectured by a bunch of limousine liberals, okay, from the Upper East Side of New York and from the Hamptons, okay, about any of this. My lived experience is that.
That probably was my favorite interview moment in the interview.
He also, at one point, when he was on the subject of mainstream media, ripped into CBS, which I kind of liked that. He's sitting there with Charlie Rose of 60 Minutes and talking about just the failures of the mainstream media to just mischaracterizing a lot of what Trump says and does. And I just thought Bannon did a better job of explaining Trump than Trump does. You didn't hear Bannon talk about ratings or polls or step into some of the areas that Trump does that makes him just hard to swallow sometimes. So I thought he was I have not heard him speak at length like this probably since a radio interview I heard of him like 18 months ago.
This is his first television interview ever.
Oh, it was?
Ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I mean, you're right. You heard him maybe at CPAC, maybe in a couple of radio shows, but by and large, you didn't hear much from him. And perhaps we should have heard more from him because he's quite articulate on topics, even where I disagree, like, for example, his stylized version of American history. That's not quite American history, as Steve Bannon was describing it, the American system. And we were always protectionist, although there were certainly periods of that, but I don't think those were good periods, generally speaking. And number two, that we had border protection. We didn't tolerate persons here illegally, and our immigration law implicitly was good. No, the Chinese Exclusion Act wasn't good. Our immigration law has been tinged with wrongful prejudice through much of the nation's history, and we should acknowledge that. And people shouldn't be excluded because they're Chinese. People shouldn't be excluded because they're Irish or Italian or any other demographic. It should be based on a belief system and a perspective in terms of why are you coming to this country that should be vetted. But Bannon kind of glosses over that with his quick run through of the 19th century up until the early 20th century and the Roosevelts. But to your point, going back to him not being pushed around on race issues, which was some of the best stuff, particularly because he's considered, he's called by the left a white supremacist all the time, well, as the president is, as everybody who doesn't disagree with him. But Bannon is not going to get pushed around, and I can see why Trump likes Bannon, because he is exactly who he says he is, Bannon, a street fighter. And this was pushback on Charlottesville and the response.
I was of the opinion that you should condemn both the racists and the neo-Nazis because they're getting a free ride off. Hang on, they're getting off a free ride off Donald Trump. They're getting a free ride because it's a small group, it's a vicious group. They add no value, and all they do is show up in the mainstream media, and the left-wing media makes them up as some huge part of Donald Trump's coalition.
David Duke.
David Duke shows up for every media opportunity because you guys put the cameras.
Well, but
Charlie, they're irrelevant.
The media does not make David Duke say what he says, that he applauded what the president did. That's what David Duke did.
The president has condemned David Duke and what David Duke stands for.
See, the thing that's interesting about that exchange, David Duke is Charlie Rose's question and argument. David Duke, David Duke, David Duke. He just repeats it. And this after Bannon already said, which is true, David Duke is a creation of the big government D.C. press corps that wants to elevate David Duke to tar Trump. There's no question about that, and the white supremacists, and to blow them out of proportion in terms of the size, raw numbers, as well as the threat they pose. And obviously, he's absolutely right, too, that they're poison and hateful and vicious and have no place in American politics, or frankly, in America. They're despicable, right? Of course. And so Bannon says that unequivocally. But here's the other thing, too. I wish you would have done a little jujitsu. Charlie Rose, let me ask you something. Since you said David Duke, David Duke, David Duke, the media doesn't tell him what to say. No, I know. The media doesn't tell him what to say. But you legitimize what he has to say. Mm-hmm. And so you're taking somebody who you would probably agree with me in terms of my description as vicious and hateful and illegitimate. But you're saying when he supports the president, that's when he's telling the truth. Otherwise, he is a purveyor of hate. But when he's supporting the president, we should take him at face value. We should never take him at face value before when he says, no, I'm not, and I'm just I'm just a white nationalist the same way, whatever, black civil rights leaders are black nationalists, David Duke's propaganda. We shouldn't take him at face value when he makes those false comparisons. But we should take him at face value when he applauds the president. Oh, there it is. David Duke applauding the president. Totally fictional. And Charlie Rose is such a hack. He doesn't even listen to, I'm sorry he is. I used to really like Charlie Rose, particularly his interviews with Bill Buckley and others. But he's just so tethered to this talking point and to this media trope that there's these connections that he doesn't listen to the answer. He doesn't respond to it on point. And he sets himself up to be undermined by the very premise of his question.
Right. He didn't listen to the answer, which is that the media turns to David Duke as like this go-to person, like they do with so many other issues, like they go to the Reverend Jesse Jackson on a civil rights issue. They never get beyond these people who just flock to the microphones. And then you're right. They legitimize what these people have to say by doing that.
I'm sorry, but the media loves the race hustler. They love the race hustler. They love conflict. You think the media likes buy the world a Coke and a smile moments? No, they don't.
Well, I want to ask you this, though, because
they inflame racial discord. That's what they do, whether it's Flager and Jackson or Duke and whatever the other clowns in Charlottesville.
So when Andrew Breitbart passed away unexpectedly, and the role of Steve Bannon became greater at Breitbart, you even heard people who were some of the originalists there a little concerned about what content he was allowing. I want to know what you think about Breitbart and whether or not some of the content that they do put on that site contributes to this view of Bannon being a white supremacist.
Well,
and has he brought some of this on himself?
Well, by the way, we'll ask Joel Pollack, a senior editor at Breitbart, that question at 8 o'clock. But in terms of my answer to that question, there's no question that he has. He should have never said that Breitbart is the news outlet for the alt-right.
Right.
Should have never said that.
He did say that.
And so, look, I don't agree with a lot of Bannon's economic prescriptions, and I don't agree with a lot of the content on Breitbart. I think the tone sometimes is unhelpful. But is Bannon a white supremacist? Absurd. That's absurd. That people who say that are the people who just call everybody that disagrees with them a racist. They're
right.
not. They're not serious people. They're not to be wasted a moment upon. So that's what I would say. There's a lot of value in what Bannon had to say in 60 Minutes last night, and you should extract the value and also feel free to disagree with some of what he had to say. Mm-hmm. This idea that it's all or nothing with everything is also absurd. Mm-hmm. It's juvenile. What Bannon had to say about the swamp is exactly right. What Bannon had to say about politics and how you move a policy agenda is right. I thought the insights he provided on the dynamics between legislative leaders and the president, particularly in the early days, was important. The insight he provided on the decision Trump made shortly after victory in terms of embracing the establishment in part because he had to staff a government and try and govern was insightful and important. He provides a lot of information in frank terms that helps people understand why things are the way they are, how politics actually works. That's important to improve the civic IQ.
And he was critical of Trump in certain areas. I mean, he called the firing of James Comey one of the biggest political mistakes in modern history. So he took issue with a few things that Trump has done. He also said,
Bannon, here's another insight that he provides that is important to understand for politicians at every level, for the American people who want an accountable government. Personality versus institution.
I think if there's one criticism or one observation, is that the president, in coming here, right, has still thought, at least in the beginning of his administration, that it's about personalities. And if I can change this personality, or if I can get this guy on my side, I can do that. And it's not what the institutional logic is. I think some of that was with the FBI and others in the State Department and how his foreign policy is playing out. But I believe you're going to see over time, he's going to have a greater appreciation that this is a city of institutions, and you must engage them as institutions.
Yeah, that's a really important point to understand, and I think Trump has been slow to understand that. Thus, the kind of I'll just go to the point person at this agency or the point person at that agency, and and try and work them to get what I want or to get them to do what I want effectively. And it's more complicated that you're up against institutional interests, not just people with titles, and that's an important distinction that I think people who are neophytes coming from outside government need to understand coming into government.